As you can see by the title, today I need to ask the question, is Tokyo Ghoul Re coming to an end very soon? And the reason why this topic is very relevant is because of the latest chapter that came out this past weekend. I think everybody by now knows how Ashita loves to use parallels, how he loves to do callbacks to his previous chapters throughout his series, either, references to earlier parts of Part 2, or he loves to do straight out, parallels to Part 1 of Tokyo Ghoul. The entirety of Tokyo Ghoul Re has paralleled Part 1 Tokyo Ghoul. All of the arcs in some way, shape, or form reference the other arcs in Tokyo Ghoul, and it's constantly done this throughout each individual arc of Part 2. And with the latest arc, and with what is going on, we already see parallels being displayed from the final arc of Part 1. And as we know, since Ashita loves to do that type of stuff, and parallel symbolism, all this, the question we need to ask is Part 2, Tokyo Ghoul Re, coming to an end? And just to clarify, I'm not saying Tokyo Ghoul in general is coming to an end, I'm just saying Part 2, because there's just so much left to be explained that there's just no way that it's going to be ending in probably 20 or 30 or so chapters. There's just way too much information that Ashita needs to dive into before the series can actually conclude. But what I'm asking, the question I'm asking is Part 2 coming to an end? Because what we have with Tokyo Ghoul Re is seeing Kaneki finally stepping up and doing what he needs to do to change the world, to build the bridge for both sides. And it's been very apparent since the start of Tokyo Ghoul Re that it's more along the lines of CCG's perspective. We get to see CCG fleshed out and see exactly who they are and what type of characters we have to deal with on this side. While Part 1 Tokyo Ghoul was more of focusing on, the Ghoul side. Seeing the Ghoul side, they select their sides, who they're with, who they're not with, and all that. That's kind of what Part 1 was with, but also following Kaneki. While Part 2 still continues to follow Kaneki, but it shows more of, the human side. We get to see what CCG is, and what, each individual character stands for, what they want to accomplish. And so when you look at both of these parts, there's obvious parallels. There's differences, obviously, but there's obvious parallels. And while the series has continuously, progressed, we need to ask the question, is this series Part 2 coming to an end very soon? Because right now, what I see is that it's the perfect stopping point very soon. Since we're getting into an arc, since it was referenced in the latest chapter, now we're at the exact same point, very similar feeling to how the final, arc was in Tokyo Ghoul Part 1, within Teiku's Raid. Probably one of the best arcs of Tokyo Ghoul, and everybody was jumping for joy when they saw that arc, how awesome it was. And since we had Suzuya himself even mention in the latest chapter that he's getting the same exact feeling that he had when the Anteiku Raid happened in the first place in Part 1, we could only assume that this is an obvious parallel to, the final arc, and that would mean that we're getting into probably, the final parallel of Part 2, which in turn means we might be entering into the final arc of Part 2, and which would set up for Part 3. So looking along the lines of this, let's kind of make some comparisons here. As I already said earlier on, Part 1, we saw the ghouls' perspectives. We got to see whose side they were on, how they operated and all that, and who would possibly join Kaneki in Part 2. While Part 2 Tokyo Ghoul, it focuses on, the human side and seeing who would possibly join with Kaneki and who wouldn't join with him. Basically, both parts were making the sides, both sides of the big battle to come, which is to destroy V entirely. And so what it looks like here is that the final arc of Tokyo Ghoul Re might actually focus on, our human characters. Our characters have yet to decide whose side they're really on to finally make that choice, and then that will be the conclusion of Part 2. I could see something like that happening, because I think it's very obvious by now that there's a lot of characters in CCG that know what type of heinous shit Furuta has been doing, what he's been doing behind the scenes, how he's lying, how he's manipulating people, how he's working with the ghouls, obviously. So with some of these characters, like Suzuya, for instance, understanding that there's something very sinister going on, obviously they're probably going to jump ship and probably not help out CCG, but in turn, help out Kaneki in his entire group. So I could see something like this definitely happening, to where sides shift and people leave CCG to, join Kaneki, and then that's kind of where Part 2 ends, and then we start Part 3, where we have it to where Kaneki's group is trying to defeat V, to take back the media and all that, make it to where, you know, the world actually knows what Furuta is doing, destroy V, go to the other countries and figure out what's going on there with all the other ghouls around the world. I mean, there's just so many things to explain and answer that that's mostly for what I think Part 3, while Part 2 and Part 1 was more of setup for the end game of the series. So that's the question I have to ask. Do you think Tokyo Ghoul Re is ending very soon? Is it reaching that point to where it's basically over, and then we're going to have to move into the next part? Because, I mean, the title was already explained. I mean, the title of Tokyo Ghoul Re is called Tokyo Ghoul One-Eyed King, because the two little dots, you know, that's actually one-eyed, because they're colored differently. One's black, one's red, which references the One-Eyed King, and as we know, Re means king. So, the entire title of Tokyo Ghoul Re is actually Tokyo Ghoul One-Eyed King. And because of this, we already have, you know, our One-Eyed King, which is Kaneki. We already have, you know, the organization formed. We already have it to where sides are starting to pop up and all that. Furuta's making his move. I just feel like the way it's going now, it's the perfect stopping point for a Part 3. So let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. I love you all so much. Please be safe. Chibi out.